Hello, my friends. It is I, Rich Filiberto, DM Philly, out here on the internet, your friendly neighborhood podcaster, back with you again for another week of discussion about The Acolyte. We are breaking down season 1, episode 7, the penultimate episode of the inaugural season of this journey into the High Republic. Episode 7, Master Sulfy's Choice. I, of course, am not alone. I am joined by my Padawan learner, the one and only Taylor Ball.
Hey, what's up?
Hello
it's
there.
Hotter than Mustafar out here, Rich.
Oh my God, the references, Taylor.
I forgot it. I looked it up like 2 seconds ago because
I
told
totally
myself
knew
I was
that you
gonna
did that.
like.
But Mustafar is very filled with lava, and it's particularly hot and murky and sweaty. And the two of us in upstate New York are dealing with a level of humidity heretofore untold.
You have the high ground, though, Rich.
I do. I do have the high ground. Don't fuck
I'm sorry.
around,
I'm like
Taylor.
already losing my mind. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Acolyte podcast.
Hello there. Episode 7, Sulfy's Choice. I'm just kidding. It's just choice. We, of course, are over here at Screen and Page. Go follow us on all the social media platforms at Screen Page Pod. There is a link tree in the bio of all of our social media profiles. You can follow into the Discord to hit us up if you have feedback about The Acolyte or any of the other TV that we are watching right now. Taylor, I'm wearing my light side Star Wars shirt this week. I got an R2D2.
Nice.
It's very nice and warm. I feel good. I'm coming in with some light side energy. Of course, people could see this awesome TV shirt if they want to go watch these podcasts on YouTube where they're going up live. I was a little late last week, but this one will be up soon. I promise you. Go watch us on YouTube. Give us the subscription. I would really appreciate it. Let's talk about episode 7, Taylor. What'd you think?
I liked it a lot. I was feeling, I think, similarly to a lot of our friends, that if this episode had come earlier in the season, a lot would feel much stronger. But I really enjoyed it. And I just want to say right off the top, something that has just been in my brain. We're all fawning over Danny Sith guy. We are not giving Young Soul enough credit here.
Did you call him Danny Sith guy?
Yeah. What's his? Oh, it's Manny. It's not Danny.
Manny, but I'll stick with that. Darth Danny?
No, it's totally Manny. I'm so sorry. But no, we're sleeping on Young Soul. He's so cute. I think he's so cute.
He's very cute. The haircut really gives him so much kind of youth. It's such a dorky elementary school haircut, and Torben's little like dorky haircut as well. I really love them. Love them. I'm all in on Lee Jung-jae. It really is so impressive that this guy couldn't speak English 4 months before he was cast for this part. He's doing such an awesome job with the role. And despite my copious criticism of some of the writing and narrative choices we've gotten, I do really feel like the ensemble in this show, for the most part, are just delivering beyond expectations, beyond the material that they have been presented with on the page, dare I say. Taylor, my big take here, this is far and away the best episode of the show, and it's not even vaguely close. It's not even remotely close. Episode 7 clears everything. I have a very specific perspective that I have seen echoed a lot. I'm seeing a lot of people say this should have been kind of parsed out across the season, these bits of information. I don't know if this is a hot take. I don't think it is, because it seems like there is a similar sentiment from a lot of folks. But the whole other half of this episode, like episode 3, was entirely vestigial and useless. This should have been the 3rd episode of this series. It was the longest by far, which I think is no small factor in my enjoyment of it. I am so much more engaged with the story. I think it would have been much more satisfying. And I think that this mystery box nonlinear narrative has completely cut the legs out from under the show for me. I think that they went for this really bold artistic choice to capture the energy of Rashomon. And I do appreciate them reaching for the stars, but I feel like they just imbalanced themselves and collapsed underneath the effort. They're trying to do so much in terms of going to a point in history we've never seen before, subverting our ideas about the Jedi, presenting and onboarding us to a huge ensemble of new characters, while also working this nonlinear mystery box narrative. And
Yeah.
the mystery box, I think, killed a few of the Disney Star Wars projects so far that would have ended up being stronger series if not. And while I appreciate how bold the idea is, Rashomon is a 2-hour film that you sit down and watch in one sitting. And that is a fundamentally different viewer experience than taking these bite-sized 26-minute unsatisfying morsels over a period of 7 weeks. So
I have to agree. Yeah.
I don't know if that's like cruel. And I do feel like I'm seeing similar thoughts from other people. But everything that we got on the other half of this could have been compressed into this for one very hearty, satisfying episode. That if it were episode 3, I think would have been so much more engaging in terms of building momentum for this show.
Yes, I agree with that. I totally understand, and we keep saying it, but I totally understand this want to do this cool, creative, non-linear storytelling. But I do think, and maybe it's even more of a Star Wars thing. I think that just getting to give me the meat and give it to be raw, to quote the other, to quote Rings of Power.
Whoa.
But I know I'm pulling that out of nowhere. I just think that the like simple, straightforward story, while leaving some things a mystery instead of the, I don't know. I think that I agree with you that this would have been better earlier in the season. And again, with the binge, instead of getting these little bite-sized pieces week to week and just getting the binge, I feel like I would have just been so much more satisfied. But anyway, I agree.
Picked up most of what you said right there, but I don't want to misrepresent that. Pretty much all I've heard for the last minute is Old Dirty Bastard in my head going, "Oh, baby, I like it raw. Oh, baby, I like it raw." I'm sorry.
No idea what that is.
Shimmy, shimmy, yeah. Everyone my age does, I assume. Old Dirty Bastard in Star Wars would be great, by the way. All I know is that they've been really short episodes and we've been building, and my big hang up here is that we have sacrificed character development for the mystery box of it all. Yes. And while there are incredible reveals and surprises and cliffhangers in the Star Wars saga, it is fundamentally a pretty straightforward story. We drop in Amadeus Res, the action is kicking already, and we're into the middle of this serialized story where we just get caught up in the momentum, and it's pretty easy to understand where we're going. So while I really applaud, I've talked a lot about Russian Doll, and I think Leslye Headland did something awesome with that show. I just feel like we're trying to subvert way too many expectations, and the effort to attain this kind of higher level of artistry ended up cutting away so much of the stuff that I love about a Star Wars project. So It is what it is. That's not what we got, but that is certainly my sentiment. Let's get into it, Taylor. You're talking about young Master Soul. Yes. So I think the other part that I can't misrepresent, that I just absolutely adored about this episode, was 4 Jedi just hanging out on a planet doing Jedi stuff. They're like camping, they're taking samples, the teenagers being whiny and petulant, the Wookiee is cooking. It's all so great. And, at the risk of being the boring old man here, because I think that there's a lot of people who are probably going to be like, that's the most boring thing. We've seen that a million times before. But truly, have we? Have we ever seen that before? In the animated properties, you can go back to the Clone Wars and watch Jedi chilling, being Jedi, for 7 seasons of awesome television. But most people do not account for that in the greater Star Wars canon. If it's not live action, they're not engaging. And I have yet to see, across all of these Disney Star Wars shows, the straightforward, here's a crew of Jedi being Jedi while the Jedi are like, cool, and this is what they're doing. They're going on adventures. They're an adventuring party. They're struggling with their ideology versus the humanity that they all carry, even when they're aliens. I'm talking about the aspects of being a people, not just a human specifically.
Yeah.
But it's not for nothing. I've never seen that. And it seems insane to me in retrospect that I'm looking back at all of these Disney Star Wars shows. Like, this is such a layup. It feels like such a gimme, Taylor, that these guys, nobody has done this yet.
Yeah, no, I loved seeing just a team of Jedi that had to go out and do a survey, like a geographical survey of this planet that should be dead, that is totally thriving and trying to find the sort of why this is happening. I love this. This is just like on the job Jedi. But for 7 weeks, that's crazy. And Indara is clearly the most level-headed, awesome Jedi there's ever been.
I am so happy. So I think we're going to talk about some of the maybes and the what ifs as we go through it, because I do think part of what's clever about the episode choice, we see everybody making these choices. I'm joking about Sophie's choice, but it really, he does have to make the Sophie's choice at the end between May and Osha. But I really appreciate coming away from it that I felt like at least one of them did mostly the right things and had the right instincts. And we'll get into the kind of specifics and the nitty gritty of some of that and interrogate it a little bit deeper. But we can see the ways that the Jedi are all fallible and caught up in their own bullshit, that struggle between the ideology and their humanity, and the ways that she embodies these really typical Jedi traits. And it is kind of cold and feels dispassionate and feels cruel almost at a certain point. But I was so pleased to come away with at least one of that crew of 4. Like, you did pretty much all the right stuff. Like, there's mostly logical decision making for once in this show, and I'm really deeply satisfied from it, at least from one character. So you note that the planet was supposed to have been destroyed, Brendok. They've been here for 7 weeks. It was obliterated. They note a hyperspace disaster. Now, I'm not a reader of the High Republic novels, but this is a fundamental event in Star Wars canon at this point. Leslye Headland, a huge fan of the High Republic novels. I believe they started being published in 2019. And the first book of that kind of series in that time period that came out features this catastrophic hyperspace disaster, which was kind of instigated by some antagonists. It wasn't just an accident, but the ships blowing up in hyperspace created wreckage that scattered to like multiple planetary systems and destroyed a series of planets, like full on kind of annihilation, extinction level event. And I believe in those novels, if I'm attributing it correctly, it's some stories about how the Jedi like order actively tries to save a couple of those planets. So this is a pretty important moment across the greater canon that a lot of High Republic fans were Leo gift pointing at.
Okay, that's cool. I dig that.
That is cool.
Yeah, I was so curious though too, because talking about the planet, Torben mentions that probably an old mining site or something. This little like fortress that the witches have created.
Does that ping on your radar at all when Torben says mining?
No.
I'm just thinking back to last episode about Darth Danny, who is hanging out in his cave of minerals that he is using to fabricate highly specific armor while following a philosophy incredibly similar to Dark Mother Coral. I feel like there is a version of this story where I know you were excited that we were maybe on planet Ball Demnick, but I think that there's a version of the story where this is Brendok, and that the callback to like look at some mining facility ties into the cortosis metal, and that Darth Manny's got Osha like camped on the other side of the planet in the current timeline.
Interesting. I had not thought of that.
I did. That's why it's good there's 2 of us, I guess.
Yes. Okay, I like this. That would explain like how they got there, which was a question that we had from last episode.
I mean, I'm very happy with this episode, but my greater issues about the show still stand. Like, there's
Mhm.
one episode left, and they have a lot of questions to answer,
Yep.
not the least of which is how is Darth Manny connected to these witches? And, like, how did my suspicion Mother Coral teach him all this terrible stuff? Like, where did he come from? You know? So it feels like a big lift for the last episode. And candidly, I don't have a lot of confidence I'm going to be satisfied because I just don't, it's not to do with this show.
Yeah.
I don't trust the Star Wars Disney shows in general to give me a robust finale that resolves the issues that the questions of the season have provoked. You know, that was bad
That's fair.
syntax, but so we'll see. I can't wait to be proven wrong and like come back next week super satisfied. But so this hyperspace disaster is pretty interesting and sets up this great foundation for like, no, this planet was like a barren, annihilated wasteland, and all of this life teeming everywhere is a node. So we talked really early on. I don't know if you remember it, because I barely remember what happened 6 weeks ago on these podcasts, but I talked to you about emergence in the Force.
Yes.
And so here we go, the confirmation of like, okay, we're here to see if there is a vergence that has created all this life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I loved that's Soul is so driven by like passion and emotion. And I love that he just kind of gets into it and is like, oh, and Dara's not going to spell it out. Well, I will, because I think it's cool.
I mean, again, like, I don't mean to be like such a simple like Sam, but it was deeply satisfying for me to watch four Jedi sitting around a campfire, kind of getting into this philosophical debate and to see the way that one might approach teaching a Padawan differently from another, and that kind of conflict between Indara and Soul. And so I've seen a lot of people indexing on this in the articles around today, but Indara gives this line to Soul, like, yeah, buddy, that's why I have a Padawan and you do not. Now I'm seeing a lot of people index on like this wounds Saul to some degree, and that this statement very much motivates a lot of his actions going forward. Did you kind of read that, or did you just kind of take it at face value of like, okay?
I think I took it at face value in the moment. Maybe if I rewatched and spent a little bit more time, maybe I would think that, but in watching it just the one time, I don't think I thought it was at face value. It seemed like they have a friendship, even though Indara is clearly, she's more Jedi than Soul is in some ways, right? Like she has some of these very traditional like Jedi characteristics, and like is sort of trying to keep Soul in check. And I think he has a respect for her and her advice. So maybe, I mean, I did just get done saying that he's a very sort of passionate and emotional person. So there's a possibility that it was one of these things that he's like never going to forget that somebody said to him, you know?
I don't mean to be like too basic, but I just did read it more as like descriptive information that we can have about him. Like he's going to show us the ways he is emotional, and this added layer to just validate, no, this guy's a little bit too emotional. And that is why he is not the same kind of status as Indara. And what I really appreciate later is we're going to see that not all Jedi are created equal in the same way. Like he doesn't have the same skill set or capacity to even do what she does. Her kind of mastery over these philosophies allows her to kind of sever that connection. And we'll talk about that. But this is one of the things, you know, I talked a little bit with you last week about how Kevin Mahadeo and I have been talking about this show off air. My favorite podcast I do every week, you guys, is the 10 minutes that Kevin and I talk about the Acolyte before we record the boys. And I'm sorry that none of you could hear that, but it's a very fun conversation every week. But he articulated this thought that helped me like get to the heart of my thing with the Jedi. I feel like in modern times we're so critical of the Jedi philosophy and ideology, but we are so quick to overlook the actual reality of the people involved in this. These are children that are being taken away from their families and indoctrinated in this kind of monastic order that asks them to compartmentalize their emotions and have no personal connections and to subsume all of those very self directed human impulses that we have. But there's a reason that they do this. If these children are left without training, their power is dangerous, right? There's an element of danger to every force wielder that if they don't learn a kind of mastery over control of these abilities, that they can just do damage without intending to. And the further step there is that if you don't teach the kind of people with this power in the world to have a sense of personal responsibility and to be thoughtful about the ways they apply that power, then very often they're going to use that power to serve their own interests, right?
Mhm.
And to drive their own desires. And that's not inherently bad, but it does really embody part of this fundamental philosophy in Star Wars. It's a thing that Dave Filoni talks about a lot. I love Dave Filoni. I think he's a great steward for the franchise at this point. I know a lot of people are not enamored with his storytelling style as he has been more involved in the live action shows. And I can acknowledge his participation probably is some contributing factor to the results that I am complaining about
Mhm.
week to week. But I do think that the guy gets the big picture,
Yeah.
which is this fundamental pull between selfish Sith, selfless Jedi, and that neither extreme is correct, that there is this measure of balance between them. And balance is this thing about
Yeah.
the force that's always important that Leslye Headland has really made an effort and the rest of this team to put at the center of the show. And I feel like they're just missing the forest for the trees in the execution. So I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but I like the idea that, yeah, the individual Jedi are fallible, but it's not inherently monstrous what they're doing here. Like, there
Mhm.
is a well intentioned motivation to take the children from their parents and isolate them in the way that we do. And so we shouldn't just paint with the brush of critical. Like, we should look at them critically, but it shouldn't just be critical. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I totally get that.
I'm on a tangent, Taylor, but this is the stuff that I felt like the Jedi of this episode embodied for me in a way
Mhm.
that I kind of liked. Personal fallibility while acknowledging the difficulty of their job in the moment and how
Yeah.
you parse that.
And I'll take it one step further because I really love that too. But what I loved more is that Indara does end up eventually contacting the High Council. And their response is, "What have you guys been doing? Stop messing around with the Force user children and get out of there." Like, I love that these children aren't your, obviously, they're not your regular kids. They are being trained by these witches.
Mm-hmm.
And whether their intentions are good or not, I think that that's a whole nother can of worms that we could get into. Like, obviously, Mother Coral feels a bit more on the evil side of things, where Mother Anastasia is this just a powerful force of a woman and a
Mm-hmm.
witch. And I love her even more after this episode. But the kids, like, while Osha does end up wanting to go with the Jedi, I think that, like, and Indara continues to say it to Soul throughout this episode of, like, stop putting your own feelings on other people. And I do think that Osha was a bit swayed by his excitement and, like, want for her to join him, this, like, emotional connection that he immediately felt with her, that she was meant to be his Padawan. And I think that there was some sway there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so interesting. It is this, like, consistent theme across fantasy. I'm currently replaying Dragon Age Inquisition, which has this whole thing about mages, about them getting taken away because they have powers and they're dangerous and they should be trained. All of this kind of thing is a fascinating thing to think about. And I loved kind of getting the different takes from Indara and Soul and the witches, and kind of seeing this dynamic play out in a Star Wars universe was very cool.
It's a conflict that I love as a central tension in storytelling, and it's something that I circle in and hone in on when I run D&D games a lot, and I think you've had some experience with that, of the ways that I love this questions about how personal freedom comes in conflict with the people responsible for protecting a civilization. When it is your job to be the peacekeepers, to protect the people without the power to protect themselves, to stand up for the disenfranchised and those who don't have a voice, how far is it okay to go? How much of people's personal freedom is it reasonable to curtail for the good of the many? I mean,
Yeah.
it has been a perpetual cultural conversation in the kind of dominant years of my adult life. I'm 21 when 9/11 happens, and this was the central
I
discourse of
thought
the
that sentence
Patriot
ended
Act.
at I'm 21 and I was that was
Yeah,
pretty
no,
funny.
I'm not trying to put that much bullshit out on this podcast. I don't think anybody's believing that for an instant, homie. No dice.
No.
I'll tell some fibs, but it's always for effect.
Right.
I'll never lie about my age. Anyway, let me circle in about Indara a little bit, because you make this assertion. Well, at least Master Indara called the High Council, and she said she did.
You don't think she called the High Council?
I do, because as we've established already throughout the last 6 weeks of this podcast, I want a Jedi that I can believe is trying to do the right thing.
Mhm.
Right? And
Yeah.
so I want to take it at face value. I want to believe that the Jedi Council said, no, don't kidnap the children. How about don't start an entire diplomatic conflict while you're on a science research mission?
Mhm.
Stand down. That feels good to me. That feels like characterization of the Jedi that I'm like, okay, I like that. But I have seen people pose the question as to whether or not she is making an autonomous call here. Because what we have seen again and again is Vernestra is off on her own, doing her own thing. She self-directed this mission to hunt down the assassin and is keeping it very actively secret from the political inquiry that is coming, which again, God, you guys are overextending. You're trying to enter a whole political inquiry subplot to the Jedi Council that we spent all of 6 minutes with across these 7 episodes, and you're going to deliver that along with everything next episode. That's where I get nervous.
Oh my
It's just a
gosh,
lot.
yeah.
But so
Yeah.
I'm ranting a little bit, but we see Vernestra make autonomous decisions. We see Saul go off script this episode a lot. Saul makes some choices that are clearly not approved. So can we extrapolate that same behavior onto Indara?
No, I think Indara is the opposite of that. I think that Indara is showing us that Venestra is sort of in this weird gray space where she is making these autonomous decisions. And Indara isn't doing that. She is waiting for the High Council, and Venestra is not actively avoiding the High Council, not bringing the information to them.
I'm 100%
I wanna
with
believe
you
it.
there, because I do think in this idea of a show about balance and reflections, and we've thematically been kind of resonating with this so much, I think we should take what we saw on screen more than what we can conjecture happened off screen. And I think we could just take it at face value that she did do this to offer a counterpoint, because to this whole conflict of kind of personal responsibility and governance, or personal freedom and governance, at the point that you decide you autonomously know better and you no longer need the consensus of the other people, that is where you have definitively gone beyond the pale, right? And I think we can look at Soul's choices this episode dude, what are you doing? This is just bad decision
Also,
after bad decision.
Torben, what are we doing here, bro? What are we doing?
I mean, shades of Anakin in all 4 of these Jedi, straight up. But Torben especially is the angsty teenage Padawan who just won't listen to her.
I cannot, dude. I'm with him in understanding kind of his behavior right up until he's these girls are my ticket out of here, so I'm gonna speed off alone to the Witch Fortress. I'm like, What are you gonna do?
Here's like my nitpick for the week. Like, how does they just let him slowly walk over to the speeder bikes? Nobody does anything. There's
No,
3 people who
Corbin,
could like
don't.
force push him, force grab him, just run after him, do anything here to stop this. And they're just like, yeah, you're clearly out of your mind. You got possessed 12 hours ago. You've been jonesing to like get the hell out of here for the last like 6 weeks out of 7. Like, just casually walk over to the speeder bikes and we'll see what happens once you get
Have
there.
the Wookiee just pick him up by the scruff of his neck. Like, come
I mean,
on.
there was at least so that I could not be disappointed, my fair share of stupidity in this week's Acolyte that I will take. And like, I do appreciate this is right, though. This feels like good stupidity. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Of like, well, they don't think that he's going to go running off after them. And so
Right.
I buy that they let him casually walk over.
Oh my gosh, dude. This
Dean
kid.
Charles Chapman in this role, I love him. I really love him in this part. Like the way they aged him up to old Master Torben, I thought was pretty effective because
Oh,
he's such a baby faced Tom and Baratheon when they get him back here.
yes, he looks. I could not. I was like, that's not the same person.
Oh,
That
yes,
doesn't
it
look the same
is.
person. That's it's so crazy. They did such a good job with like aging up Torben.
Long live Sir Pounce. I really love Dean Charles Chapman. He was great. And to your point, Mother Anastasia, like Jodie Turner Smith, really good, really good. The delivery of like the death line. I mean, it's classic Star Warsism. She's right there with Liam Neeson and Qui-Gon Jinn. I'm like,
Oh my
hold on, hold on. I just have to say this one last thing before I depart.
the DM says, "What do you say before your character dies?"
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So let's talk about it. We get the whole perspective of the other side of the twins, right? Saul is kind of spying on them. At which
Wild.
point he's going to break into the compound and continue spying on them. Now, are you already like, oh, Saul, what are you doing here? This is
Yes,
really bad decision making, man.
I just. Oh my gosh, he's so guided by his emotions. He's such a young adventurer. It's like, I don't mean to keep going back to Dungeons and Dragons, but it's like,
Well, it is
oh,
our
okay,
common ground, you know.
yeah, but it's like, oh, a character like sees something intriguing, and the dungeon master's like, okay, they walk away. What do you do? You're like, I follow them, and the rest of the party's like, what do
Bro,
you mean you follow them? Like, what are you talking? What? And now we have to wait for this entire other scene while he
that's
continues.
usually when the
It's a
other
fucking
players are
cock
like,
dog.
we follow them. And the first guy's like, I make a stealth check, 30
Yes.
seconds, I vanish into the undergrowth. And you're like, God damn it.
Bro, but
So
yeah,
I
so
do
crazy.
love seeing everything from this side. And again, I
Yeah.
just have to say it, but it makes the rest of it feel so vestigial. Like I just rewatched all of the season last week. And I told
Right.
you before we
Yes,
sat
you
down
you
for
did.
last
Yes,
week's
yes. I
episode.
thought you were gonna say you rewatched it
No, no,
again.
no, 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 no. No, I just liked this and I walked away like I'm happy. I'm
Oh,
not gonna
hell
overthink
yeah.
it, you know?
Love that.
But yeah, I don't know. I really like the way that he is like so kind of emotional and that he does get dragged into it and that the out of context kind of witnessing of these events make it look much darker than we might think it is. But I just think everything that came from that episode 3 that we needed to fill this out could have been placed within this context. And it feels so redundant in retrospect. Like I can't imagine having to rewatch that knowing that then this is coming towards the end. It just feels frustrating to me. I know I'm whining, but it's what I do at this time every week, I guess.
I
So
mean, yeah, the order of episodes is Yep.
let's talk a little bit about the witches themselves. Like Witchy Woman, we're back. Mother Anastasia, very cool stuff. As we see the other context of this, the way that ultimately, Saul will convince them, no, we have to interrupt their ceremony after we break into their home. And Indara, again, like trying to be like, just maybe let me, the one female in this group, go in alone to engage with the Coven of Witches. I really love the Dathomir call out and like, no, they're not Night Sisters. Like
Yep.
they did a great job connecting to lore from every part of Star Wars canon, from the High Republic novels to the Clone Wars series,
Yeah.
to the prequels, to the sequel trilogy, even though we don't love it, to the OG stuff. Like this is really cool. in a way that is deeply satisfying to me. But
Mhm.
it sets us up ultimately for they're gonna come back in, they're gonna have this big conflict, and we see Mother Anastasia, the other side of the perspective as she possesses Torben, and this is the point where I'm like, "You're cool, but I don't know how many, like, altruistic character traits I should be attributing to you, like, this is very dark."
I she's so interesting because I think that while this does feel super dark and like obviously entering somebody's mind like this, she feels very hag like
Oh, yeah.
in that she's not lying to Torben. She's picking out the truth that she's finding in his mind in like defense, and I I'm kind of on her side a little bit because I'm like, oh sure, like try to get rid of as many Jedi as you can without violence.
I appreciate the offensive defense. I mean,
Mhm.
again, I'm not trying to just kind of whitewash the Jedi here.
Right.
They break into these people's home during a religious ceremony, armed with
Yes.
weapons.
Yeah.
So I don't want to misrepresent that. Like, yes, this is already effed up. But
Mhm.
Indara tries to present the best foot and offer the diplomacy. She could do a better job reining in these boys. Like you would think
We
she
should
should
not have.
know that
Yeah.
you need to do a better job rating in these boys, but it's just very charged and dark. And again, we've
Mhm.
seen the Jedi do mind tricks. Darth Manny tells us, like, please don't bite my memory. This is a big D&Dism for us because mind control is such a prevalent tool in role-playing games of every
Yes.
genre and variety. I've played a lot, and whether you're modern day vampires or knights hunting dragons, like mind control will be in your role-playing game, and it's amongst the most heinous and insidious of atrocities I think
Oh
that you
yeah, yeah.
can commit to another person. So there's that element of like, God, this is really effed up that you're threatening to like irrevocably destroy the young student's mind here. But I do appreciate that you're just doing it in defense of the people under your protection. And it goes back again to this central kind of conflict of you have a responsibility as a steward to these people.
Yeah.
If you have the power to protect them and don't use it, how implicated should you be if they fall victim to some
Right.
atrocity here? So I appreciate it, but God, it is coded very dark. And it's another one of these things I think that I really like it as a standalone moment, but it feels wildly incongruous in the greater context of what happened. Cause like, she's kind of like, oh, maybe kill your master. I will help you. I can help you, like seducing him in that way.
Oh yeah, yeah. She's definitely like there's manipulation happening, but also the thing that I was kind of like tuning in on it, it feels like in order for her to actually like for the eyes to go black and for like the whole mind control thing to actually happen. This felt very like Galadriel, like getting into everybody's mind where they're standing there. But like you have to say yes. Like
It's like invite the vampire into the house. Yes.
exactly.
I really did like that's what I'm saying, where I think the scene as just a standalone thing, it's a very cool depiction of breaking down somebody's mental defenses, of
Yeah.
finding the chinks in that
Yes.
wall and getting them to open up the aperture on their own kind of violation so that
Mhm.
get in there. And that's really effective. It just got to the place where I'm like, but what's the end goal here? Like, if you were just trying to threaten him, that all felt like a really intense way to mind control him. But
Right.
I liked it. I'm not actually complaining about
Oh,
this.
no, 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 and I'm not actually trying to, like, defend her in any way because, yeah, she enters this, like, kid's mind and is like, "Leave the Jedi, like, do what I want and I will help you, blah, blah, blah." Like, she's just trying to get him to leave, I think was, like, what
I
I was
agree.
right,
Yep. I
but
agree. I think it's the ultimate like sword of Damocles of like, look,
Mhm.
let's not let this get as bad as it's going to get. And rightfully so, she's reading the temperature of the room. There are a
Yeah.
lot of people that are going to act beyond her control. There are a lot of people that are going to act beyond Indara's control. Like you get the sense that these two women alone in a room could have resolved a lot of these issues with none of this
Absolutely.
bullshit.
100%.
And that's a good sentiment to come away from it from. I feel like in the ways that I have been so aggrieved at the lack of character development, there was really great characterization for all of the dead ancillary characters this episode, which brings me back to like
Yeah.
my actual frustration here.
Oh my
Like
gosh.
it did not escape me when I came away from this. Like that was awesome. Where I'm like, oh yeah, there's absolutely no grown up Osha and May, and Darth Manny is not in the picture at all. That like
Right.
they're the least interesting part of everything that's going on.
I
Okay.
need to know how Manny is involved in all of this. Like, I just need to understand why is he connected? I'm like so curious. That's my biggest question, I think, coming out of this.
Me too.
But
And I think I'm very fixated on Coral because we're going to see things now
yeah,
escalate, right? Soul goes back. This is where we get the whole thing. I love the idea of the council, like we talked about, being like, no, no, do not kidnap the children. Leave the children with their people, you know?
interfered too much.
And I think there's a great question about the autonomy of a child and how much, because it's like the micro of the macro idea I'm talking about, like a government making choices to be responsible for its citizens and curtailing their personal freedoms is very similar to a parent doing exactly that with their children, right? Like certain things are beyond your control. And whereas the responsibility, like, should the 8-year-olds be allowed to say, I want to leave, and you let them leave, is a great question to put at the heart of this. I think in that way, the like philosophical conflict that we're centering around as the kind of point of gravity of this feels so satisfying as compared to a lot of the
Agreed.
kind of greater ideas that we've been playing with for the last 6 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever. So we get to this point where ultimately the Jedi are going to come back in, but Quarrel goes to May. I'll get their names right for the whole episode this week.
I believe in you.
It's
You can
because
do
I
it.
like am finally activated, maybe, or something. Like I had no problems in trying to recall what
With the
happened
fire.
to
Love
him.
it.
But so Coral is going to go to May and be like, get mad. That's it. Use it. Shades of Matthew McConaughey in our other podcast of like, use it. It's like, oh my God, I love this moment. So Mother Coral, I feel like, has to be connected to Darth Manny.
Yeah.
But what I liked, because I think we speculated as to whether or not somebody might have mind controlled the kid, one of the Jedi, May, whoever it was. But I don't get the impression that she mind controls this child at all. I get the impression that she just kind of like pulls her ripcord, sets the spark to the kindling, and it's like, now go and burn. And just turns her
Absolutely.
loose to go do like chaos.
150%. May is already pissed. She's literally kicking and screaming, being dragged out of this room with Mother Coral and saying, like, what's wrong with you, yelling at Osha, saying these like horrible, hurtful things. And yeah, absolutely. Mother Coral's like, oh, let me just pour some gasoline on this fire. Let me wind up this toy and let her go.
Which does lead to the fire as we see these
Yeah.
events play out. Now, I got to ask you, I have a very specific story about my experience as a 12-year-old that mirrors what happens here so closely, it's almost terrifying.
Oh God. Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Everybody's alive
I love
and
that.
fine.
Good.
So
Great.
just know that before I tell it.
Cool.
But how did I set the book on fire? Whoops, I burned down the whole compound. Play for you. Because I'm seeing a lot of people reading it as like, okay, that's very straightforward. And it's a little unsatisfying that the kid did it and that it was an accident. But I've seen a lot of speculation that there might yet be another shoe to drop and there's more to be revealed here. So before I say anything more, I just want to know how you read May accidentally burns the compound down on your own.
Very straightforward. I felt like this is very classic. Like, I mean, I as a kid have numerous stories of like, oh yeah, me and my sister are gonna play barbershop. Oops, I cut half of her hair off. Like,
Ha!
it feels very that. Like May is like, oh, I'm gonna burn this precious thing that like Osha has, and oh, here's fire. Like, here's the way that I can destroy this. She drops it, and she's actively trying to put it out, like with her little foot. This can't do nothing with this little tiny little feet. But yeah, it felt like an accident, and it felt like but I don't know. It's interesting because obviously it leads to these like giant explosions.
So I read that as, because when you watch the fire start, there's the panel behind it that starts like
Yeah.
sparking, and I get the impression that there's something to this mine. Mines, sometimes we
Yes.
mine explosive materials, and
Yes.
on record on this podcast, I am not an expert in cortosis metal, but my vague understanding of cortosis metal, given the information that I've gotten from other Star Wars nerds who I deeply appreciate, is that it transfers heat really powerfully. This is part of why it shuts the lightsabers down, and it can create a compound reaction. I noted the Darth Plagueis novelization last podcast or the week before, and I believe in that book there is an incident where like the cortosis heats up too much and burns an entire planet's surface down, and so there is a read there. If you're
So
a
that's
deep
how
cut,
Darth Manny dies.
maybe,
Is fire.
maybe.
Maybe.
There
Anyway.
is a bunch of speculation that I have seen that the kid didn't burn this compound down at all. This does not compute. Master Indara shot the mine from her ship after she sends everybody in, and she created the explosion. No, I don't. Get out of here, dude. Let's stop worrying about like what didn't happen on screen. Option 2. Mother Coral went and like created some compound reaction somewhere deeper in the place to ensure that it would be like catastrophically blown up. But like, I say no, because it just doesn't track on the timeline of events. She would have had to do that before the ish hits the fan. And I just don't, it doesn't compute. She wouldn't want to kill everybody in there. Right. Like, she might blow it up after they're all dead. I don't think she wants to kill the Coven of Witches.
I don't think so either.
I think we read it as it should. Is it clumsy? Does it maybe not make sense? No, but that's the whole rest of the show, you guys. Like, why are we like reaching for a deeper logical thing here now? So, gut check. Do we want like story time with Rich?
Yes.
About a fire?
Yes.
Okay. So the year is 1992. It's the summer after 6th grade. We are all 12 years old. My gang of cronies and I, my band of merry men.
Cronies.
We were not playing barbershop, Taylor. I have noted before on other podcasts, I was a bit of an irresponsible child.
Mm-hmm. A bit.
I played with a lot of fireworks.
Oh, God.
A lot of fire.
Okay.
And so there was a point during this summer after 6th grade where, like many adolescent boys, my merry men and I became deeply fascinated with fire in a probably dangerous and unhealthy way.
No, I've witnessed your dangerous fire.
Rephrase in an assuredly dangerous and irresponsible way. Okay?
Of course.
So we began stockpiling accelerants, and we had cans of gasoline and all kinds of stuff. Now, we lit our fires pretty responsibly, always on concrete in open areas. I was very cognizant of like brush fires and wildfires. We never were like lighting brush on fire in the woods where it could get out of control and burn down a neighborhood. Good. We would like fill up a tuna fish can with a 1/2 inch of gasoline, put it in the middle of the street, and light it on fire at 3 o'clock in the morning to stop traffic. And it was really irresponsible and bad, but this is the kind of nonsense we got up to for that whole summer. So fast forward to the week before school's about to start. We're at a kid's house. He is not part of our crew of merry men, but he knows about our obsession with fire. Fast forward to we are in a small alleyway on concrete, and he pours gasoline down on the concrete, at which point he leans down over the gasoline. Now, this was a thing that we had already learned not to do. We were very responsible, but immediately upon lighting the fire on the ground, it raced up his arm. It licked the side of his face. He was burned. He dropped the gigantic container of gasoline he was holding in the other hand, at which point 2 gallons of gas spread down the alleyway along concrete and created a literal wall of fire while my friend and I are trapped inside of a child's playhouse with iron over the windows so that we could not climb out. Literally, Taylor, all we could see through the front door is a wall of flames as the kids screamed and ran into the backyard. And so we escaped and proceeded to run like the devil was chasing us back to the four winds from whence we came. Everybody ended up okay. There was a helicopter involved. Many fire departments were called. This was a definitive moment of my childhood, a line of demarcation from which many of my band of merry men learned very valuable lessons about parenting and about how to use fire responsibly. So all of this like immediately translates to me like, oh yeah, the dumb kid lit something on fire, burned her hand, dropped the container of accelerant on the floor that has grown entirely out of control.
Yeah. I have so many questions about that story, but I feel like I shouldn't dig into it.
I'll answer them on another podcast.
Great. Amazing.
Story time with Rich could be fun one day, but I sometimes think my life is more interesting than it actually was. So
bring back the fireside chats. Let's go.
Just a lot of like interesting points here as we now come down to it. The fire is like burning. Everything's going to hell. Sol has chased Torben back to the compound, at which point he makes yet another of his catastrophically bad decisions where he's like, all right, even though you were completely mind controlled last time, come with me as we now assault the compound to get the children. And so the two of them go in, and it actually goes a lot better than I anticipated at first. But we get to like this moment as they're all in the courtyard, and this is like a really awesome shot as Anastasia is framed behind them, and May comes out, and it's the first of many times that Sol will mistake May for Osha. I don't blame you, Master Sol. I do it too. It's okay. But ultimately, this like, help me, she screams, help me, presumably to her mother's, not the strange Jedi who's invaded her home, you know?
Come on,
and Sol reacts as Anastasia like disincorporates. It's such a dope shot. Really Torben's lightsaber. Coral goes forward with this big battle axe. Anastasia sees the blood about to get spilled. I am desperate to know what she was going to do there as she like disincorporates in a very similar style to the way the Dathomir witch Marin does in Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. Ooh. We see May also starting to disincorporate. And Sol just panics, pulls his lightsaber, and stabs the witch.
Buddy, no. Anastasia was most certainly just going to May, right? Like, she's just...
Was she? I mean, I do think there's an element of uncertainty. I have a lot of ambiguity here. And there is a part of me as a deep cut Star Wars nerd that is thinking a lot about your boy, what did we call him? Darth Sagittarius, Emperor Palpatine.
Okay.
And like, oh, maybe you're raising these children so you can steal their bodies. Like, there is an element of that there. And there's a little bit of creepiness. But I do think that we've seen enough from Anastasia to understand that she wasn't acting nefariously. This was going to be an altruistic, going to help her child kind of moment.
Yes. It's talking about balance, this relationship with Anastasia and Coral. Like, clear, they say it. Anastasia wanted to solve all this without violence, and Coral is like, "I will die before the Jedi take my children." Like, they are on such opposite sides of this, but geez, man.
And that's what I think is really interesting, because I think we can firmly say that the witches are dark side force users. They're all their emotions and their feelings in that way. And while Anastasia is trying to show the kind of good restraint that any leader should, there is a difference in the way they allow their emotions to govern them. And it just fits with the rest of these reflecting themes. The triangles are everywhere in this place. everywhere. Every button on every panel, all of the motifs on all of the reliefs. When we get the shot of Soul looking down while they're doing the training of the kids, there are triangle mosaics on the floor. One is light and one is dark, and they are pointing at each other. And this led me to a conclusion where I made a very kind of foolish assertion last week about these kind of binary resolutions of like OSHA will either join Manny or OSHA will stand against Manny. And there is clearly this threefold element. You invoked the hag before, and I
Mhm.
think you mean it in the D&D sense of like the mother, the maiden, and the crone. The hag as like this aspect, this elder aspect of the triad goddess. The triad god and goddess, I mean, it's fundamentally prominent in Christianity with the three aspects of like the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. You and I have done a lot of mythological deep dives talking through Willow and more recently the Wheel of Time as to this threefold goddess and
Yeah.
the mother and the maiden and the crone, and the ways that there's all these kind of philosophical musings about how that might have been the kind of dominant religious belief before the kind of patriarchal deity of the great religions that we know today. When I say great, I mean big, not
Big.
necessarily good. I don't mean to endorse or approve any particular denominations of faith, except
Yes.
for the Way of the Force on my Star Wars podcast.
Hell yeah.
I used to go to a Unitarian Universalist church with my ex-wife, and when they asked me if I practiced, I would tell them I'm a Jedi like my father before me. So
That's amazing.
they loved it too. Unitarian Universalists generally pretty cool about Jedi attending their churches.
I wasn't raised religious. I have no idea the words that you're saying.
That's okay.
That's fine.
The UUs might be your people. Nonetheless, there is some very cool stuff going on here as we get to the conflict. I see Soul in this moment as just like acting impetuously. And I do think
Yeah.
that he's fundamentally guided by the same motivation as Anastasia to protect the kid. And I appreciate, I've seen a lot of folks disappointed that this all ends up as just a misunderstanding, that we don't have a clear kind of villain who acted with pure ill intent. And I love it. I think it's one of the
Yeah.
best executed ideas that the show has presented, that people are imperfect and that we make mistakes, and those mistakes compound on one another. And if we can't slow down and make an effort to communicate clearly and understand one another, the problems will only get worse. And
Mhm.
people die for that stuff. And I like it a lot. It lands really satisfying to me. And then it sets up the better of the two lightsaber duels. People raving about episode 5, but like the blocking and the darkness and the trees, like, get out of here, dude. This is so much of a better fight. The episode 1 fight was so much better than the episode 5 one. Like Indara, Carrie Ann Moss with the wire work was
Oh, it's really
extraordinary, but
cool. Yeah.
this was sick. And I'm not like okay that we killed off Keldaka before. I still would have appreciated seeing some more here, but it delivered on what I needed it to be.
Okay, amazing. I was gonna ask because I felt so bad for you, Rich, that the scene with Kelnaka fighting is him being like mind controlled
Oh,
against
don't get
his
me wrong.
Jedi
It
buddies.
like annoys
Like
me to no end that this is
that was the
context. It really does. It really
oh,
does. The part of me that's desperate for just Jedi doing Jedi stuff would love the prequel of the Acolyte, where we just spend 7 weeks with the 4 of those people on this planet. Like, I'm
yes.
here for that show, Leslye. But
You know that there was training with the lightsabers where it's like Kelnaka versus the other 3? Like
it's choreographed really well. Dean Charles Chapman, we haven't seen do a lot of lightsaber work yet. He's great. Lee Jung-jae is great. Whoever is in, I should look it up. The Wookiee suit, fantastic. You know, I mean, the lightsaber work has been great across the season. I just don't think episode 5 was nearly as impressive as everybody else did. Like, this to me is a much more satisfying duel. And the way that there's so much, because we talk about duels in Star Wars, Taylor, like people point to Luke and Vader as the best one, not because it's choreographed so incredibly, because there's a story to it and there's emotional
yes.
character motivation to it. I talked a lot about this most recent episode of House of the Dragon, one of the biggest spectacle episodes across all the seasons of Game of Thrones and Hot
Ooh.
D. And it is so character driven and intimate. It is, I think, really quietly impressive. And
Ooh,
in
okay.
that way,
Yeah.
this felt character driven, at least on the part of Master Soul, who is the
Mhm.
only person we can conceivably know at this point, right? The other two are like caricatures, they're archetypes.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because I'm not sort of, I don't want to compare the lightsaber duels too much because I think they're all really cool, but I do think the episode 5 I was just more this was more satisfying in terms of like I can see everything and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
know
yeah.
what's going on. But
Yes.
the episode 5 I was so curious about like wait, what's going on? So it was a very different feel, you know what I mean?
Comparison is the theft of joy. I say it all the time. I'm the one in the wrong
But
here that
this is
I'm
what we do now.
comparing things. Yeah, I'm here for an arbitrary and reductive podcast. It's
Yeah.
carryover, so take it with a grain of salt. For me, I talked about it, but it was the expectation. Like, you showed me 7 people in a row with lightsabers, and then not a single moment of all of that choreographed as a cohesive unit. Like, that's inherently just
The
wrong. I
charge.
think
Yeah.
like you led with the wrong foot. That was such a cool moment, and to not deliver on it feels just deeply underwhelming.
Yep. Totally
Kalnaka just like feels dangerous and out of control and
Yeah.
emotional and filled with rage. The force push into the force pull. The
It
way
was
that Soul is so reluctant to use the lightsaber, that he's
yeah.
only parrying and defending. The way that like desperate Padawan Dean Charles Torben is like staving off the Wookiee, because part of what's always implied is like you're using the force for some of the strength here. Like, this scrawny kid can't hold off the biceps of that towering
Mm-mm.
specimen of Wookiee manhood, but
Well,
he
tell us how
could
you really feel, Rich.
with the force. So I just really liked it. And then we get to the moment. I mean, Lee Jung-jae with the flips and the jumps, and it looks really
Bro.
cool. The
So
lightsabers are
cool.
lightsabering, and here comes Indara. She like shuts it all down. The ultimate like kind of leg sleeper hold on Kelmaka. She drops in, and we see that she's got enough mastery of the force techniques to sever this mental connection. And this is a great reveal, because we said before, but like, gosh, these witches don't look like they burn to death. I mean, smoke inhalation is not a very like physical way to die. So I always kind of considered that. But we see how all the Coven of Witches die, Taylor,
Yeah.
except for Master Coral, who goes staff out. Gaseous form. All of the dungeon masters listening, have your NPCs memorize gaseous form.
Yes.
Better yet, just make it a spell-like ability or a psionic, so it can't be counterspelled.
Hey, subtle spell too.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, that's like
go.
a mechanical way to do it, not DM hijinks, and so I don't
Come
care.
for the Acolyte. Get Dungeons
Stay
and
for
Dragons
pro
advice.
DM tips.
There we go.
So the question is, clearly Indara kills all these women. Does she know that she's going to kill the women when she severs this connection? Is this a willful, I will kill these people to save Kelnaka? Or is it like, oh my God, you've just made me kill a bunch of people, and now I'm even more mad about what happened here?
So I was
It's a little bit of like splitting hairs. I don't know if it matters much what the response is, but I saw a lot of feedback both ways, and I was curious where you stand.
I also was wondering, I guess, because I had trouble with this moment because I was a little bit like, is Indara like, clearly there's like a catalyst of Indara like disconnecting this, but all of the women are like doing this kind of like black smoky business.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of, they're chanting. I was a little bit
Mm-hmm.
like, are they trying to kickstart the ascension of Osha? Like, are they trying to do that in this moment? Like,
That's an interesting thought, but the only reason my instinct would be like no is because OSHA's off the grid. They have no idea where this kid is, and seemingly you need to be relatively close to the Vergence itself. Like,
right.
if it's not clear, the Vergence is the gaping hole that is like the one that we see in The Last Jedi, right? Like this pit of darkness. So I read it more as, because like Coral says, you made a mistake bringing him here. A lot of dope lines too, of like May telling them during the testing, my mother says that it's our job to walk through fear. Everyone has to be sacrificed for it. I mean, this is the Jedi's like central conflict, just a matter here, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it happens if you don't master.
Maybe it's just me being like, now I'm the one like grasping at straws, which I did also last episode by saying like Soul is the big bad. But I'm just gonna continue this because yeah, whatever.
Yeah, have at it.
But I just was thinking that was there a greater ritual that was trying to happen? Because there's mention of sacrifice, like that there needs to be a sacrifice.
True. Yep.
For the girls to actually like come into their power. So I was kind of, I don't know, I was thinking about the sacrifice of it all. Are these witches like just ready to sacrifice themselves for the girls to gain power or something like this? I don't know, but they all die. So
I mean, for our conversations, I'm trying to stay rooted in the mechanisms of storytelling on the show and like the vibes more than getting really into the minutia, because I know your exposure to Star Wars is different than mine. And I'm not as good as some of our wise masters out there in terms of recounting a lot of this lore. I haven't read a lot of the EU. There's a lot that I don't know, you know. But there are these elements to the Palpatine, to the Virgins, to the Force dyad of like possession, body snatching type stuff happening. It is a very powerful theme across the Old Republic games where like we find out there's a whole nother galaxy with a separate empire who actually like has won and done a really good job. Like there's like crazy stuff the deeper you get into the Star Wars canon. So I'm trying not to take too much from out there and get too deep into the theory crafting. I read it mostly as face value, like Coral GTFOs and the rest of the Coven, I presume, are not as powerful Force users as NSA or Coral. And that's part of why it takes all of them to possess Kalnaka, who is presumably a better Force user than young Padawan Torben, right? And I read it as Indara not realizing she's going to kill them until they all die, at which point she realizes, oh my God, I just killed 10 people, and is a little bit mortified that she just was involved in that. And I think the wrinkle or the question that I come away with that we will not get an answer for is whether or not all these dead women's souls is trapped in Kelnaka's body. And like, that's why he's like spiraling out of control while he's on his weird planet, right?
Oh my God.
Like he's doing witch stuff. He's being an apothecary. He's picking herbs. He's drawing the symbols everywhere. Is he like, is it a bad case of associative identity disorder where he's got a coven of witches trapped in his head?
Wow,
Like Master Manny out there? Like was Master Manny there to learn from this coven of witches trapped in his head?
Do we think that Kelnaka like willingly gave in on some level?
No, but I don't think Torben did either. I think he was broken as part of what happens here. I think we show him being outmaneuvered by a more tactical opponent. Now, I mean, that's like kind of how I read those moments, as much as I'm like saying this, but he does literally like, okay, I surrender, you know?
Yeah, he does. He does.
Like, take
like
me
a
with
little
a
bit
grain of salt. Like, I think that I read that as like a defeat in terms of a battle of the minds, right? And in that way, I imagine that yes, Kelnaka submits or subsumes, you know? And that's where, like, again, like if this were episode 3, there could be, I don't know, there's more real estate. Like, I think there's more to get out of all of this. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, we have one episode left, and I have an uncountable number of questions that I forgot that I have questions about.
I did. I started episode 1 of this show. Like, I have absolute confidence Leslye Headland will deliver a one and done season that satisfies itself at the end. And I'm sitting here now like, I don't know.
How do you feel on this, Leslye? We're going to see.
A lot of cool stuff to the resolution, the conflict between Soul and Indara, ultimately this Sophie's choice that I keep alluding to, where he's got both of them. He can't hold both. I like seeing his weakness with the Force, his lack of mastery. I think we can read an element of the emotional turmoil, making it even harder for him to focus. Perhaps if he was a little bit more dialed in to the Jedi code, he could have saved both kids, but he makes this Sophie's choice. He saves Osha, not May. He comes back to the ship. And this is the point where he's like, we got to tell the truth. And this is like immediate fireable offense. Like, no ambiguous question here. Soul should not be a Jedi after this. I like him. I feel like the motivation is rooted in empathy. I feel like the decisions are catastrophic and irresponsible. And I like that rather than a depiction of him as a like heinous, nefarious, like bad guy.
Yeah.
And there's the element where I come away from it where Indara's like, how dare you leave this kid? You're going to leave her now? And so I want to know how you read that moment from her.
I love it because it's a little bit of subverting expectations instead of her being like, oh yes, present yourself to the High Council and like take your punishment because this is what you deserve. But instead her having, like I said, I think there's such an interesting relationship between Soul and Master Indara, and I really love it because she's like, no, you made the choice and you didn't listen to me. So now instead of taking the quote unquote easy way out and just giving yourself in and letting whatever happens, you made the choice and you need to live with it.
I read it that way too. I see it as the fact that she's trying to toe the line and be dispassionate and kind of hold everything at arm's length until the point that this disastrous catastrophe plays out around her and she's complicit in the deaths of many people and this ends so badly and she has her own culpability. And I think the decision is motivated by empathy for this child where she's like, no, this is the right thing to do, man. Like ultimately I can acknowledge we need to do what's right. And so she does the cover up. And this is one of these things that like the Jedi love a cover up. It's like there's a lot of cover-ups with the Jedi. And so I get it. Like, again, the fallibility and the criticisms. And that's where I like a depiction that entertains both. I don't need just this kind of impervious, impregnable, perfect, flawless depiction of virtue when I see the Jedi, but I also don't need like the Jedi are actually bad, man. Like I think it's a little reductive and I'm a little bit over it after the last 10 years. Like, yeah, I get it. They could be. It's all nuance though, right? And like this is not Twitter, so I hope we can still have some nuance in the conversation, you know?
Yeah.
I think Anastasia has some absolute lethal killer lines here. I don't have it exactly in front of me, but one day you Jedi's good intentions will be the death of all of you. Like, oh my God, like that's the good-ish. That's the good Jedi critiques. And it's awesome. And it sets up great weight. And I love where we get to at the end. And it leaves me with this criticism of Soul. Not that, dude, you effed all this up. He did, but I don't hold that against him as much as when this girl washed out of the Jedi Order and whatever happened that she decided she would no longer be a Padawan. Osha made a big deal out of, I was not kicked out. I chose to leave. Okay. How the hell do you not leave with her? You are clearly, even more than has been depicted so far, this child's surrogate father. This great lie that you've told, I don't feel like it is such a nefarious lie. You have concealed a really important fact, which is that you're responsible. Your hand literally is the one responsible for killing her mother. And so hiding that from her is really bankrupt, but it's from a parental's motivation of caring for a child. And so I can absolve some of the like responsibility there because I don't think that parenting is easy. And that's why I have no kids. Like, I don't know how you resolve that. What is right for this kid at this point? And the greater issue of you had no business putting yourself in the middle of these children's family and white knighting your way into a problem that didn't exist. That's true. And I think is a very fair critique of Saul. But my greater like frustration with Master Soul at this point is you sent this kid off into the galaxy and just left her to her own devices. Your precious order was more important to you than this child after everything that happened here. That's effed up. You dropped the ball, bro. Thank God Master Indara was at least one good Jedi. Torben, you probably shouldn't have poisoned yourself. You really didn't do anything that bad. You were a dumb teenager, man. You didn't have to commit suicide.
Yeah,
And
way
I'm
too hard on
sorry.
yourself. Oh my god.
Right. And I'm really sorry, Kalnaka, that you had to spend your retirement with a dozen crazy witches in the back of your head,
Poor Kelnaka. Truly just really got the short end of the stick all around, I feel like.
If it's not evident, I really like this episode a lot. And part of my frustration coming out of it is just why couldn't more of the show have been like this? So much of this worked for me, but we'll see, maybe I'm going to be surprised next week. These notions of fate and destiny, I've talked about them on a lot of podcasts, probably Star Wars ones because they're so relevant. But this notion that I was presented to in this kind of series of a documentary about film analysis, really, in terms of how they're presented in fictional narrative. Fate is often an immutable endpoint, a destination that your journey of life is moving towards. And there is this constant kind of debate between determinism and free will. And that's the notion of fate and why it's interesting in storytelling.
Yeah.
But very often when we hear fate discussed in fiction, it is the idea of this immutable endpoint that was your fate, and there is nothing to be controlled by it, and it actively works against and stands in opposition to free will. It is ultimately about determinism, and that regardless of your choices, you will end up here. This was your fate. But destiny, typically in good fiction, is utilized more as a vehicle, as a manifestation of free will. And the idea, which I think was articulated pretty well in episode 3, that Anastasia gives to the kid, this is your moment to choose. Yeah. Destiny is not decided for you by some alien outside force. You have a hand in determining the course that you will take. Your actions will determine your destiny, and destiny can be a self-determined mandate. This is my destiny, and it will drive you. Or destiny can be the path that you simply find yourself on. Is this my destiny? Can I make a choice that will get me out of this path, that will allow me to escape the fate at the end of my road? And so I think in that way, all of these themes exist in the show in a way that could be so much more satisfying to me. Yeah. And this episode really just helped me intellectualize a lot of my frustration over the past weeks. So I hope it's evident that I really enjoyed this, and I really enjoyed this podcast. This is far and away the most fun I've had talking about the Acolyte all season. Not just having that fun every week, but it's fun to show up very excited to talk about Star Wars because you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this episode too. And I have to say, while we're talking about Mother Anastasia and her lines are so good. I was so happy that I was, they're showing us all these scenes that we have seen before in episode 3. But I really can't get over that moment when Mother Anastasia is hugging Osha and this acceptance of you are allowed to choose, and I will fight for you and what you want if this is truly what you want. It kills me every time. It is such a beautiful moment. And yeah, I think that this episode was acted just the hell out of everything. Little Torben with his head pushed against the wall, screaming.
It's such a brutal fight.
Brutal.
I felt for him. That moment specifically, oh my God, dude, you're gonna crush his head. All the literally Wookiee callbacks, it's not wise to insult a Wookiee's cooking, yeah, this is why I want more Wookiees in my Star Wars,
Yes.
Oh, and again, God. Not to get back to the beginning, but come on, man, somebody at Disney, just give me a show about some Jedi every week, just a group of adventuring Jedi, that would be different. We really never seen it. It would be so cool.
It would be so cool.
Taylor, that was episode 7 of The Acolyte, Master Sophie's Choice. Next week, the finale of season 1. Man. Any final thoughts before we part? I love how I sat down and was I I like this episode, but it's probably going to be the shortest podcast we've done so far.
And every time you say that, we should know that it's going to go longer than we think it will. But I will, one last thing. The end credit music. Did you listen to that song?
Yes, I was waiting to get here.
So good.
Oh my gosh. This is where I am just like no fun and don't like nice things and don't deserve to be happy because I was like, I hate it.
I knew you were
hate
gonna
it so much. I hate it. I hate it. Hate.
As soon as it started, I was like, "Oh, we're
I'm
just
gonna go put my death shirt
game.
back on, Taylor. That was episode 7 of The Acolyte. We will be back in 1 week's time talking about the finale. But until then, Taylor, what do you got going on? Where can people find you?
Well, people can find me at Ronnie422 out on the internet and on the other podcast over here on Screen Page. What Did I Miss? Where we just did our arbitrary and reductive podcast where we rated and reviewed all of the 13 films in a TV show. We gave it some stars. We made up a little blurb. It's very fun. But now we're back in it. And you threw us back in with Reign of Fire.
Oh my God, what a classic movie. What really shocked me, a little teaser for the podcast, is how dramatically the dragon design from Reign of Fire informed the dragon design of all of the major franchises throughout the 2000s. If you side by side Reign of Fire's dragons with every dragon that has ever appeared in Westeros, all of the dragons in a Harry Potter movie, there are so many similarities, and you can very openly find the creators of all of those properties. Like, yeah, there was this movie not a lot of people watched called Reign of Fire. They did really good dragons.
That's so great. It's so good. I will say too that if you're following along with What Did I Miss going forward, we're going to be doing a little fun voting system. So come join us in the Discord Screen and Page Club. There's a link to it in our link tree and a lot of our social in the bios of our socials. Come join us over there if you want to have a say in what we do end up watching in the future of What Did I Miss podcasts.
Excellent. I, of course, am talking about House of the Dragon every week with the great LaTanya Starks. Last week's episode, stunning, an immediate standout of the series. I'm breaking down The Boys every week with the one and only Kevin Mahadeo. That's running right in tandem with The Acolyte. So we're going to be talking about the penultimate episode this week with the finale of season 4 next week. LT and I are getting together to talk about The Bear. We had some scheduling challenges in the last week. Entirely my fault, but you'll hear from that pretty soon as well. I got some Cobra Kai coverage coming to you next week. The first part of season 5. I think they're releasing season 5 in 3 separate parts, which I'll be sure to complain about on the podcast, but I'm very excited to break that down with the one and only Jason Reed and Marissa Garza, the Cobra Kai team from back at PSR. And there is a new Batman animated series coming up in the next month or so that I got my eyes on, Taylor. But that's enough to say about that for now. We will be back in 1 week's time talking about the finale of The Acolyte. But until then, may the Force be with you.